If you're in construction, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Constructive Behaviors podcast. I'm your host, Barb Allen. I'm a woman with decades of experience in the construction industry, and most of it on the job site. I know how rewarding this industry can be. But like you, I also know that we could improve. Let's work together to make changes from the inside out. Hey everybody, today I have our second female superintendent as the guest on the Constructive Behaviors podcast. Danielle Dlugosh is an area superintendent for Hensel Phelps out of their South Central region. Danielle and I have actually known each other for over 10 years. We couldn't come to an agreement on exactly how long we've known each other, but we actually met through her dad, who you guys heard in episode 36 of the Constructive Behaviors podcast. Today, Danielle and I are going to talk about how she got into the industry, what she's loving about it, what she would recommend to others. But Danielle, even though her dad was a big, important part of my career in construction and her whole family comes from the line of construction, that was not where she was headed when she went to college. So let's start there, Danielle. Let's start with when you went into college, what were you looking for? What did you graduate with? And then we'll figure out how that translated to construction.
Yeah, so I originally went to school because I thought I wanted to be an elementary education teacher. So started in elementary ed, quickly decided against that, and actually ended up getting a degree in social sciences with history and politics. How I ended up with that one is basically just really liked history and kept taking history classes, and it was the quickest way to a degree.
So I want to touch on the elementary ed, and this may not be the most, I don't know, it's not unpolitically correct, but I'm just going to say that people, when I was a superintendent and a lot of my friends didn't really understand what I did as a superintendent, I would say, I am an overpaid babysitter of grown adult men. And so I feel like that kind of relates back to your elementary education degree. Do you want to comment on that, or would you like to pass?
I would 100% agree with your assumption there that yes, I am a very overpaid adult teacher.
Yes. Yep. And as superintendents, we work really hard and we earn every bit of our money. So we're not overpaid as superintendents. We're just sometimes very much spend our time adult babysitting. And because it's so male dominated, it is mostly men.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you graduate with your degree in history and other things that didn't really make sense to me. I quit listening when you said history. I know World War II came after World War I because they're numbered. History's never been my thing. So tell us, how did you first what was your first step into the construction industry? Why did you even take it?
So after I graduated, I moved to Houston, Texas, where half of my family had relocated after I was in college. And I just continued to kind of still live like a college kid for about 6 months. Kind of did some interviews and stuff like that. Wasn't really finding what I wanted to do with my life. And it was actually my brother told me that they had an admin position, that it wasn't a traditional admin, where basically it was a position where the general superintendent on his job wanted kind of a personal assistant to kind of do his paperwork and stuff like that. So I interviewed for that job, got the job, and that's initially how I got on a job site. And then after that, kind of realized that construction was just made more sense than anything else that I had done to that date. So that was kind of my start.
So going back to your degree then, what kind of position were you hoping to land when you graduated from college?
I honestly had no plan. Like, I graduated.
And you're not the only person who graduates college.
Yeah. No, I graduated, and most people in my degree program either went on to go get masters in education to go teach at the college level,
Okay.
or they went to law school. So naturally, I took the LSAT, realized I didn't want to go to law school because that test was horrendous. So yeah, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
So, what attracted you to the position that your brother brought to your attention? Was it the role itself? I mean, did they show you a role description? Did that entice you? Was there money? Was it people that you knew you were going to be working with? What enticed you to even say, oh, instead of where were you working at that time?
I was working part-time at Hobby Lobby at
Okay.
that time.
So still crafting, still building things.
Yeah.
What made you think, okay, instead of Hobby Lobby going to a secure building every day that's temperature controlled, maybe I'll go sit in a trailer.
Honestly, there was a little bit of comfort knowing that I had people that I knew through my family on that project. So I had a little comfort that I wasn't just going in completely blind. But also, really, I had no expectations. It was a full-time job. I did have some benefits, and it was kind of a stepping stone to get my career started, because I still at that point didn't know that I wanted to be in construction yet at that point.
So what kind of things you were working for Cliff, is that right?
Yep.
What kind of things did and Cliff was a general superintendent. What kind of things were you doing in that position when you started?
So one of the main things is he didn't really want to do his own daily reports. So that was
No
my main,
superintendent does.
yeah. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I fully get it, of why he wanted an assistant to go do his daily reports. So that was my big first task, is I would go do job walks, do man counts through the whole job, and go do all that, as well as a lot of his invoicing and paperwork and just kind of the clerical side of the general superintendent's role, which now I realize really freed him up to do more of the planning and the meetings and stuff like that, and took that off of his plate, which allowed him to be more in the details like he wanted to be. So yeah, so I really got a glimpse of what it was like to be a superintendent, even with the admin title.
Yeah, so you weren't being the typical admin who sits in the trailer and just processes the paperwork. You were actually getting exposure to the job site, to the workers, to what was going on. Um, what what did you find about that exposure that intrigued you to want to do more in the field?
I think the people and the problem solving that went into it is, I would go on daily walks with Cliff, and just to see his interaction with the craft and the other superintendents on the job site, and how they really came together. And yeah, they each had what they wanted out of the conversation, but how they came together and negotiated to solve problems that helped the job move forward. That was really what intrigued me, is the people and the relationships that you got.
What did you like about the people?
People constantly surprise you in construction. Like, you think you know people,
Love
and they will just throw you a zinger on a weekly basis. And I love that you never know what you're gonna get.
Can you give us an example?
On that same job, the just because of Mardi Gras and it's the time of the year right now, our concrete superintendent was in a Zydeco band, and we're sitting there at a concrete pour, and he's talking about his Zydeco band that he plays with on the weekends. And next thing you know, next concrete pour, he rolls up with his finishers and he brings me a CD of his whole Zydeco band. And I was like, okay, never would have pictured that at all. And it's like that kind of stuff constantly.
I love that. And I saw something, someone did a diagram or placed a diagram on a whiteboard or something. I don't remember where I saw it, but it was a few months ago. Someone drew a circle on a board, and let's say the circle was, I don't know, 3 feet in diameter. And then they took just the marker and they made one dot inside the circle. And they said, the little dot, this is how much you actually know about any one person's life that you interact with. Unless, of course, it's family or, a partner or whatever. But it was really impactful for me just seeing that diagram because it's exactly what you said. You get one piece of a person when you're working with them daily. You get that one piece, and all of a sudden they give you a glimpse into something else that they do. And you're right. Like, the things that I have learned about people that I worked with in the construction industry, I'm like, you do what? What? I love that. I absolutely love it. So, how long were you in this administration position until, well, and I also want to know, until you started feeling the desire to do more, or until someone started recognizing in you and pushing you to do more? And which was it?
Um, I think it was about 5 or 6 months into the role. It was pretty early that I was being, I'd say, groomed by Cliff to be like, hey, you're a little too smart to just be doing my paperwork. So at that point, like, I started coming to all the superintendent's meetings, and he really, like, even though the title was still admin, he was treating me like a field engineer. And I was ingrained into that staff as a field engineer. Shortly after we had a sit down and was like, okay, you gotta, like, kind of went dad mode on me. It was like, you got to get your life together. Like, you're not just going to be an hourly employee for the rest of your career. And so he was really the one responsible for putting me on the career path towards field engineer and then working my way up to a superintendent. So I think without that sit down moment about 6 months in, who knows where I would be.
And back then, as a field engineer, do you recall, like, granted, most and probably you're probably the only one that came in with a history degree, but were most of them construction management degree? Were some of them from the field? Like, where did you fit into that? And the other field engineers that you were part of that group, how did they how did they react to you coming in with this history degree?
So at that particular job, I mean, really, most of them came in either with construction science degrees or engineering degrees.
Okay.
Most of the field engineers that I've been around with, that job in particular, I kind of rolled. I was still kind of working directly for Cliff for most of that job. And then once we got into finishes, is when I really kind of got into the true field engineering role. So I kind of missed the layout stages through structure. So I
Okay.
wasn't really working hand in hand with them through layout at that position. It wasn't until finishes. And at that point, I was ingrained as a full field engineer and was just part of the field engineering team. So,
So, with that being your experience, do you, as a superintendent, do you get more energized by the structure portion of the schedule or the finishes portion of the schedule?
um, I have high points of both. I think the structure is always fun coming out of the ground because it goes so fast. You can really see the process going. The interior, I love that one just because I think that's where I started, and that's kind of where my expertise is a little bit better on the interior side. And also by that point, you can kind of see the finish line, and then you kind of get excited for that finishing and being able to turn over that building. And I've been lucky or unlucky, I don't know, to kind of always be the finishing person on a job, which I love seeing the clients take their building and, the staff move in, the kids move in, whoever the, client is. I love that feeling. And that's why I continue to do this.
It's interesting because my experience was the opposite. I started out coming out of the ground, building the structure, putting on the skin. The very first job I did, I got to be there from the time we were coming out of the ground till I was the last person on the job site finishing out punch lists. So I was very fortunate that I most always got to see a job from beginning to end. But because I started with the layout, because I started with the concrete formwork, that's where my passion has always lied. And when the building gets topped out and the structure or the skin gets complete on a building, I honestly get bored and I'm like, when is this thing going to be over? Like, I don't enjoy the finishes at all. The exception to that was the high-end luxury apartment towers that I did. The finishes. I mean, these are multi-million dollar finishes on amenity spaces, and those were just super cool. And I loved being part of that whole design aspect. But I never thought about it maybe being because that's where I started. So when I heard you say you started really focusing on finishes, that's interesting to me that that's where your passion ended up lying. So
I
tell
mean,
everyone. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, don't get me wrong, I love concrete, but there you need a break sometimes too.
Okay. Tell everybody what your path was once you, from the field engineer, because you weren't placed into the carpenter's apprenticeship program or the union the way I was. The Texas office of that organization is not affiliated with the union or signatory with the union. What did that look like for you from field engineer to what were the next steps and how long till you were running your own work?
So I was field engineer for, I'm trying to put a time frame on this now. Probably 4 to 5 years as a field engineer. I worked out from field engineer, so I think we had 1, 2, maybe 3, and then you went up to a superintendent. And then, so in that time, I was on a couple different projects. One project in particular stands out. We had a staff of 4, so I was the only field engineer. So I kind of got ingrained in, yes, the field engineer, the assistant superintendent, the office engineer when needed. It was a staff where we just, whatever was needed, you picked up and did it. So I got a lot of experience on that, and I think that's helped me later in my career. And then, so I was a superintendent 1 when I left, and came over to Hensel Phelps. And at Hensel Phelps, then I went into an area superintendent. And so since I've been kind of over at that superintendent level, I've basically been running my own area of work, or my own building. So we kind of structure within Hensel Phelps as area superintendents have a small area or a building within a bigger project. And then project superintendents are kind of over the whole job. So,
Okay. What do you love the most about being a superintendent?
I mean, I love that every day is different. I mean, you can plan your day and you can have it, on the way to work, that 20, 30 minutes driving in, you can have the whole day planned out. And within 30 minutes on the job site, and it is completely just up in arms. You have no idea what's coming next. And I love that trying to figure out and how to fix the problem of, oh, my day just kind of got messed up, and have a water main break or whatever, and just kind of that pivot and readjust and try to figure out a way to get back on schedule.
You do have to be fluid. You can't be rigid. You can't expect things to go as you plan them to be and be a successful superintendent. It just doesn't work that way. There are too many people involved. There are too many factors involved, whether it's a client, whether it's a plumber, whether it's the electrician, whether it's a project manager or one of your own field staff. There are too many variables for it to go exactly as you planned. You absolutely have to be fluid. And there are some days that it just feels good. At the end of the day, you're like, that was fun. I wasn't expecting that. And there are other days you get in your truck and you're like, good Lord, I got nothing done today, right?
Yep. Yeah, you need that 30-minute drive to just figure out what just happened sometimes.
Yeah, so when I lived in Houston, the last job I worked on in Houston, my ex-husband and I, we had just moved to the north side of town, and um, I was given a project on the south side of Houston. And if anyone knows anything about Houston, you don't want to live on the opposite side of town where you work. It took me an hour and 15 minutes to drive to work, and that's no traffic because superintendents, we go to work early, right? So hour and 15 minutes without traffic. And it was great. Like you said, you have time to think about what am I going to get done? What do I need to get done today? And then on the way home, I had at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours to get home to decompress. so that by the time I got home, it could kind of just be out of my brain and I was ready to just, be at home and be family oriented at that time. Um, have you always lived where you worked or did you work out of town?
I've worked out of town. So my
Okay.
first job was actually out of town, and then um actually my first two jobs were out of town.
Okay.
And so we were kind of commuting back and forth, come back on the weekends. Um, but it's funny that you talk about the decompress and the drive, because we were actually just talking about that, of like how much time it really takes for you to decompress from the job site. And I really think like 20 to 30 minutes, like if I lived much closer to the job than that, um, I would still kind of come home amped and not have that decompression time that I
Yeah,
need in the car.
it
And so,
matters.
mhm.
So, talking about going out of town, the very first, I was 2 years out of college when I first got asked to go out of town. And I was this kid who never thought I'd ever leave Lee Summit, Missouri. Like, I loved it, right? And all of a sudden, I'm like, Des Moines, Iowa, like, what? But I knew it was the best thing for my career. So I did it. And I loved it. I loved being out of town, and I recommend to people, especially young people starting in the industry, go out of town as much as you can, as early as you can, because later when you get married and you have families, you want to be home and spend time with them. But I'm curious, how did you feel the first time, like that very first job? So you always started first one being out of town. How did you feel about that? What was it like adjusting to a new town?
I mean, it's always terrifying, but it's also one of those like excited terrifyings. Um, to where, yeah, you go to town, you have to make new friends. Sometimes that's scary. You got to find a new gym and new grocery store and all. Like, there's so much stuff that goes into it. But what I've found is every out of town job I've been on, your job site team becomes your family, and it fills a void, and that family is with you till the end. Like, I'm fully confident that I could call up anyone on that project team from my very first job, and we could pick up like no time had left off.
Yeah,
You know,
that's great.
haven't maybe talked in years, but we still always have that connection. So.
I think that's a great transition to allies. I wanted to talk about allies when we spoke today. I want to start with talking about your brother. So you have an older brother who, David's older, right?
He is, yep.
Yeah. Um, so you have an older brother who is also in the construction industry. He is now with a competitor company in the same area that you are. How is that dynamic between you and your brother? And did you feel and have you felt that he's been an ally for you? Is it a competitiveness? Did you ever feel like he was, well, I guess he's the one that introduced you to the initial role. Was he surprised that you took it into superintendent? Like, tell me how that that particular relationship has developed for you.
I mean, I'd say it's definitely evolved. Um, he has always been a big supporter of mine. I can't think of any time where it's ever been like a competition. And maybe that started because we started with the same company. So, when we first started in our, career paths, we were with the same company. So we kind of always had that connection where we could go kind of vent or use each other as resources because we worked for the same company. And then when we both left and went kind of our own separate ways, that connection was already there. And so it just kind of continued to grow and build. And yeah, now we both use each other as a resource. I think people think that it's competitive but it's not at all. We actually don't talk about work as much as people probably think. It's more just like, hey, I didn't see you guys at this industry event, or hey, I didn't see, like, it's great. But then knowing if one of us is in a bind and we need to bounce ideas off of, we're there.
That's awesome. My my brother got his degree in construction safety. ended up not using it and he went into real estate. My brother's 3 years younger than me, but he has always been pretty sure he's actually older. Um, but I love my brother very much, but with him not being in the same industry, it's I think that there are many times he just doesn't really understand what I have done in my career and what it's like to be someone like you or me doing what it is that you now do and I used to do. And I just think it's super cool that you have a brother who has done what you've done and you can have that kind of camaraderie and that it actually works for you guys. And I love that. I have been I've been talking to too many young women lately that their families just aren't super supportive of them getting into construction as a career at all, whether it's straight into the trades or even going after the degree. And that's disheartening for me. I want people to understand that yeah, this is a great career for women as well. But for you, your dad was in the industry, and so there are. I am currently coaching a young student in high school whose dad is also in the industry and does not want them to go and follow in his footsteps. And that's not the case with your dad. How has your dad helped you? Are there ways in which having a dad as a superintendent actually maybe isn't helpful? Like give us the scoop.
So I mean, looking back, I think that the way that my dad kind of raised me and my brother definitely helped my outlook on coming into a male populated industry, because I never had the feeling that like I couldn't do anything just because I was a female. Like we had the exact same chores, like weekends, stuff like that. Like I did not get babied at all because I was a female. I had the exact same rules as my brother. Um, you know, had to be out there helping build the barn, whatever it was, that weekend project. So I think that definitely helped with the mindset coming into construction. But then also like just the way of how he communicated with me as a kid, just the way that he kind of ran the household and stuff like that. And just kind of seeing it, like I got into construction and I was like, oh, well, this just makes sense because this is just the way that I was raised. And I think that people that don't grow up in a construction family, they tend to have kind of a little shock when they get on a job site. And I didn't have that. It just kind of was like, oh, well, this is home. Okay, here we go.
That's awesome. So in episode 35, I interviewed Sammy Wallace. She was the first female superintendent that I interviewed. She's senior superintendent for Clark Construction. And we talked a lot about the allies that she has. And what about you? What about, other than obviously your dad and your brother, industry allies? In what way do they support you? And how have you created, requested, cultivated those relationships to have such strong allies?
Yeah, so I think that when I was kind of traveling around, it was kind of hard to find kind of that group of allies that could be like, yes, I had people on my job site team, but to kind of get outside the job site team. So when I moved to Austin, I made a conscious effort to try to go build my network. And so that's actually when I joined NAWIC. And so I kind of went in with the mindset of, I'm just here to build my contacts, see what I can do, network. So that's kind of when I made the focus on that. Through that, I've met kind of a group of core ladies that have kind of stuck through. And they're all kind of in the industry, but it's a very mix of different people. I have some subcontractors, some vendors, some just normal industry kind of contacts. So those ladies are great for a different perspective. And then when I came over to Hensel Phelps, we have a women's network internally. Started in that and kind of built network. And then from there, I kind of got hooked up with through we were planning a retreat, and really got to know some of the other senior ladies within Hensel Phelps. And from that kind of grew a friendship, ally group. And those group of ladies, since they're all, senior leadership, executive leadership, kind of higher level ranking ladies, they have a completely different mindset and allyship that I never even knew that I needed until I had it. And now I'm like, how do people go about this life without, these group of women around them cheering for everything that they do? Like, yeah, they're friends, they're great, but truly have their best interest of me and the company and everything around it. So they're far more than just mentors or allies. They're a lot more. So
Most of the time when I ask women about their allies, 99% of the time they talk about men because that is typically what fills our industry. I love that you immediately went to the women that are allies for you. Speaking of NAWIC, I know I've told the audience before, when I joined, I didn't want to join. I was told I was going to join by my leader at the company I was with at the time, but I couldn't believe it was so nice to finally have a group of women who understood the specific challenges that I was facing, gender specific challenges. I was married to someone who was in the industry, so he understood the industry as a whole. But when it came to this happened today. And the typical guy response was, don't let that bother you. And, it's different for us as women on, okay, well, we can't just let that slide. We're going to have to stand up to make sure that doesn't happen again. And having a group of women who can really support you and understand what you're going through. I love that. I love that you went to that first. And it sounds like Hensel Phelps is really doing something right with the way that they're supporting the women in their organization. And that's fantastic.
yeah, I mean, I think that most time that I think of, maybe I think of allyship different, is I tend to think of more like a minority type group. And so that's kind of where my mindset goes to. Don't get me wrong, I have a lot of great male colleagues and supervisors that have 100% supported my career path, and I wouldn't be here without them. But truly, like allyship, like I do tend to think about more how the females impact, because I think that you need both.
You do. You absolutely need both. All right, so let's turn the tables and talk about you being an ally. What would you say to anyone, any gender, wanting to become a job site superintendent?
I think be open and adaptable. I think a lot of people that come into this industry, especially with like construction science degrees and engineering, like they tend to think that they already know what it's like, and I think they hold themselves back. And so I think going in with the mindset of like, I'm just here to learn, and I'm learning how to go build a building and how to go be a builder. I think that's the biggest thing. I think if you go learn that first and then focus on the leadership qualities, like at that point, the superintendent is, each building has its quirks, but ultimately, if you know how to do the basics, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, I didn't have an opportunity to manage anyone until I was 2 years out of college, which is still a lot sooner than people who go on a project manager path or another path outside the industry. But I remember, there were times when I was standing in 6 inches of snow. It was 35 below zero, and I'm thinking, I went to college for this, right? But I needed that. I needed to learn how to build. I needed to learn how it affected productivity when it was super hot or super cold or too many people in a room or not enough people there or whatever. So great advice on being open to learning even more than what you just spent thousands of dollars in college to learn. So my next question is, what specific advice would you have for a woman on her climb to superintendent?
I think that it'd almost be the same advice. I think the only difference I would tell a female is not to give up. Is the females tend to get frustrated when they're not listened to and respected. And I would say just stick with it. Sometimes you gotta kind of beat the door down, especially with people that aren't used to working with females. I think that it's changing definitely in our industry, but chances are a lot of these, you talked about it, you were 2 years in before you managed anyone, male or female. You could have male supervisors that they could be 5, 10 years into before they've ever managed a female. And it is different. And so I think that sometimes you got to help them know how to manage a female.
Do you have a suggestion on something that's worked for you when you felt like you weren't being heard, you weren't being listened to, you weren't being given that opportunity to voice what really could have been impactful to what was going on?
Yeah, so I have had to have a conversation with just about every male supervisor I've had about expectations of how they can go support me. And a lot of them have never really been thought about it that way. And it's as simple as like, hey, I need you to go support me and have my back in a meeting. When someone comes and asks you a question, even if you know the answer, I need you to go say, hey, have you talked to Danielle? Have you at least addressed and asked her this before you're coming to me? And they don't ever think about the impact that them answering a simple question instead of coming and asking me, what it does to my, I'll say, reputation or a credibility. So I've started now having that conversation with all my supervisors from the get-go until something negative happens that causes that relationship or that conversation to be needed. I have it earlier.
That's fantastic. I don't remember if Coy and I talked about this. Were you there when Coy McKinney was there?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So Coy and I had a very similar, we had exactly that situation happen where a contractor just wasn't listening to me and he would go to Coy and Coy would give him the answer. And I just lost it one day. And, he thought he was helping. And then once I explained to him, this is what it's actually doing, he never did it again. And, he was great about it, but I wish that I'd had the foresight to do what you're doing, to have that conversation up front so that you can avoid that whole thing if you do it up front. Kudos to you. Okay, go ahead.
I was like, it took me a little while to figure that out, but yeah.
Final question. What is one constructive behavior that you feel helped you to become successful in this industry?
I think kill them with kindness. One thing I learned actually from my first job working with Cliff is, and it's stuck with me and it's stayed true since the beginning, is you tend to get people better side when you're nicer and you try to kill them with kindness, versus just trying to throw authority at them and try to say, yep, I'm the boss, you need to listen to me. Like, that's not going to get you respect. But helping them to help you and being nice, that goes a lot farther.
It absolutely does. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a great interview. It was great to see you. I appreciate you doing this. We will talk again soon.
Thank you.
If you know someone that could benefit from this particular episode, then share it with them. Or if you want to continue to learn about the untapped and underutilized resources that will take your business to the next level, then follow the podcast. You don't want to miss an episode where we discuss what you needed to hear. And lastly, there is a link in the show notes that will allow you to reach out to me directly if you want to accelerate that learning curve. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.